Hello, everyone out there in Twitter, YouTube, wherever else it is you happen to be finding this little podcast on the interwebs. Welcome to another episode of Fighting the Void. And today I am joined by Rachel Bruno. Rachel has been making the rounds on the internet for, I think, a few years now, sharing her story of her very, frankly, terrifying story. If you have kids, this story should terrify the ever-living crap out of you, of her run-in with CPS and how that all went down. It's I've listened to a couple of interviews where you shared your story, and like I said, it's terrifying. So first, welcome to the show, and thanks for being willing to come on and share your story once more. And but you know what? Like I said, I don't like to waste a lot of time, so just go ahead and jump right into it.
All right. Well, thank you for having me and for giving me the opportunity to share this with your audience. You know, like you said, every parent, every grandparent, everybody should be aware of what truly goes on behind the scenes when CPS is called. So my story started in July 8th of 2015. Just a little background on myself. You know, I have seizures, I have epilepsy. And one of the main triggers to my episodes are sleep deprivation or interrupted sleep. So for all you moms out there, you know that if you have a baby, you're not sleeping. So my doctor recommended that I actually get somebody to help me, at least with the nighttime, to watch my baby so that I could get my full night's sleep. And that's when I decided to hire a nanny. You know, I got referrals from an agency. She used to volunteer at the church in the nursery, not at my church, but at another church. No red flags, was married, had children herself, and was just trying to get into this new profession. So I hired her, and she began watching my son when he was about 7 days old. And fast forward to when he was about 7 weeks old, I just heard him screaming at about 4 o'clock in the morning. It was a really loud scream. And I looked at the clock. I'm like, okay, diaper change, feeding, you know, doing something like that. He stopped crying. So I tried to go back to sleep. A few minutes later, he starts screaming again. Then he stopped. A few minutes, he starts again. You know, so this went on for about half an hour until I finally, you know, I got up. I went into the hallway and his room was open. The door was partially open. She had him swaddled inside the crib and was just kind of waving him back and forth and like shushing him by his ear to see if he would calm down. He was not calming down. So she picked him up, put him like in a burp position. And at this point, he stopped screaming, but he was still crying and really fussy. You know, so I swung the door open and I think she noticed me. That's when she noticed me. And I said, no, anything happened? And she said, I just fed him. You know, she showed me the bottle. He took the bottle and he's really gassy.
Okay,
fair enough.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. And at this point, I'm home alone. My 20-month-old son is sleeping right across the hall. My husband was on a business trip. So last thing I wanted is for my 20-month-old to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and having my 7-week-old screaming. So I told the nanny, I'm like, you know, he's obviously not settling down. I'm already awake anyway. So why don't you go home and I'll take it from here. So she left my house. I unswaddled my son, looked for any bruises, fever, stuffy nose, you know, anything you could think of. And nothing. Switched out his diaper and I gave him skin to skin, which, you know, is usually what we're told to do to soothe the baby. And he did. He fell asleep on me. I'm like, okay, no, you just wanted your mommy. And I dozed off at that point. Then around 7 o'clock, I wake up to him screaming again. And I'm like, okay, no, last feeding was 4, 7 o'clock, you're hungry. I tried to nurse him and he would not latch on whatsoever. He just kept his mouth open and like throwing his head back. I'm like, what is wrong with this kid? You know, so I swaddle him, I pick him up. And again, when I pick him up, he stops screaming. So in my head, I'm jaded, you know, colic, nursing strike, gas, anything that came to my mind. And I'm like, you just want to be held, you know, so I'm just holding him. And the 20-month-old wakes up. So I go in there, get him out of the crib, you know, start my morning routine. And anytime I would put the baby down, he would just start screaming his head off. And I pick him up, he's fine. So I'm Googling, I'm like, what is wrong with this kid? My husband's out of town. Then I call my mom. I'm like, Mom, can you please come here, you know, help me with my older son so that I can take the baby to the pediatrician. She comes over, I call the pediatrician and they're like, we can't see him till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And at this point, I'm like, he's been screaming since 4 o'clock in the morning. He needs to see somebody. He's not eating. He just won't stop crying. I don't know what's wrong with him. So the receptionist is like, okay, then take him to the emergency room. So I get in the car with my mom, with my 20-month-old son, drive to the emergency room. On our way there, of course, he stops crying. He seems to fall asleep in the car, like every baby loves to do.
Right.
I get to the emergency room. To me, he's asleep, not crying anymore, not making a sound anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the receptionist at the ER what's going on. And she did take me in right away, took all his vitals, no fever, no signs of anything. And I'm like, great, here's this overreactive mom bringing the baby to the emergency room. Doctor probably going to tell me to give him some Benadryl and go home. So I go back into the room and the pediatrician comes, tell him the story from 4 a.m. He tells me to lay him down flat on the bed and he walks away. I'm like, okay, probably going to go get me something, then come back. The whole room is silent. He stops just short of the doorway. And he's like laser focused on my son, just staring at my son. And I'm like, this is weird. And I'm looking at everybody. Everybody's quiet.
Right.
And then he starts walking towards the bed. And he goes straight to his ear, right behind his left ear.
Uh-huh.
He's like, you feel this? Did you feel this? I said, no. So he puts my hand there. Like, you feel that bulge right there? I'm like, yeah. Like, that's fluid that's leaking from his brain.
Oh.
So at that point, 8 people rush into the room. They raise up the rails. I'm sitting down, I'm holding him. They start putting a bunch of things on him. He's like, we need to go do a CT scan right now to see what kind of fluid it is. It can be blood or it could be spinal cerebral fluid. And I'm just like, okay.
Neither of those sound good.
Yeah. So they're pushing me down the hallway, as I'm holding him. And as I'm holding him, his right arm starts twitching. And then that was my first. And then those nurses, they really start running.
Mm-hmm.
And I look up at the nurse. I'm like, is this normal? She's like, no. And then me having seizures myself, I'm like, okay, left side of the brain, right arm twitching. He's having a seizure. First thing that comes to my mind, oh my God, it's genetic. It's hereditary. I passed this on to my son. Said a little prayer right there. My God, please spare my son from having to live with this like I have my whole life. I get there. Doctor pulls him, puts him on the machine and tells me, we'll call you back when the results are in. So I go see my mom is outside with my 20-month-old son.
Mm-hmm.
I tell her, I'm like, I don't know what the heck is going on. We went from gassy baby to now there's fluid leaking out of my son's brain. And we're texting everybody, texting our family members. I'm texting my husband who's out of state on a business trip. And I'm just like, everybody pray. I don't know what's going on. Doctors come back. Miss Bruno takes me to the back where all the screens are, all the monitors are. He's like, this is very serious. I'm like, okay. Like, the fluid is blood. The brain hates blood. We need to go do emergency surgery right now to drain the blood and fix the fracture.
Mm-hmm.
There I am signing all the liabilities. Are you against blood transfusions? I'm like, I don't care what you have to do to my son, save my son. And off they go, taking my 7-week-old son into an operating room for brain surgery. And the doctor told me
that's enough right there. That's enough to traumatize any parent.
But the doctor told me at that point it was blood, and it's a cranial fracture and an intracerebral blood hemorrhage. So I'm in shock, right? I'm like, it didn't even register with me when he said fracture, that it was the actual bone that broke, right? Because I'm thinking a newborn, their cranium isn't completely formed yet. So I'm like, did one of those flaps pop open and
it's like legit hard to do with a newborn, actually.
Right. I'm thinking aneurysm, I'm thinking anything. Never did I think that this could have been done on purpose.
Yeah.
So I tell my mom, and again, we just start praying. 4 hours later, the doctor comes, like, okay, we did everything we could clinically well. He's doing well. We were able to drain the blood. He's stable. We fixed the fracture. And of course, my first question is he going to be okay? Is there going to be brain damage? And he said, honestly, we don't know due to his age. He's too young to know. And we don't even know if he's going to survive the next 48 hours. We have him on a medically induced coma right now. Mm-hmm. As he started having seizures after the surgery, probably due to the irritation of the blood that came into contact with the brain. So, I'll take you up to his room. He's under observation and he'll be here for a while. So I go up with my mom and my 20-month-old son bouncing off the walls, hadn't had a nap all day. Go with my mom and I just see my son laying there in the bed, seemingly lifeless. The machines are beeping, has tubes coming out of every orifice you can imagine, has his head wrapped in gauze. And again, I just pray again. I say, God, I don't care if I have to dedicate the rest of my life to taking care of my son. Just don't take him away from me. And if you're a believer, if you are a Christian, the voice of the Holy Spirit, that feeling. Mm-hmm. And it came over me and it said, he's mine. Okay, I gave him to you. Nobody's going to take him away from you. At that point, I had peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding. Like, okay, you're right, God. No better place for him to be than in your hands. Mm-hmm. And he is yours. Yeah. So at that point, I called my friend to pick up my mom, to take her and my son to go spend the night at her house. I obviously wasn't leaving the hospital. Mm-hmm. And I just wait for my husband, who was on his way straight from the airport to the hospital. Right. And while I'm waiting, a man in a uniform, like a brown uniform, and a woman with a clipboard knock on the door. And I look up, it's like, Miss Bruno? I said, yeah. Like, can we speak with you? Mm-hmm. I said, okay. This brown uniform, he looked like a ranger to me. Like, I didn't know who he was. I thought it was weird. What is this man and this woman doing here? But first words out of his mouth is, Miss Bruno, what happened to your son was worse than getting hit in the head by a bullet. And we want to figure out how this happened to your son. We want to help you. Will you help us? Mm-hmm. And I said, of course. Sit down, sit down. And at this point, I'm thinking, if they're asking me for help, they obviously know that I didn't do anything. Why would they be asking me for help? So I sit down. I tell them the whole saga from 4 o'clock in the morning, the nanny, the babies, everything that was going on, my seizures. I tell them everything. Then the cop starts asking me, why did it take you so long to bring him to the emergency room? I said, because I didn't know what was wrong with him. Right. Like, why didn't you call 911? Like, again, I didn't know what was wrong with him. He just wouldn't stop crying. He's like, why did you bring him to a hospital in Orange County when you live in LA County? Because this is the children's hospital that I know. Mm-hmm. And he's just, jotting everything down. Then the social worker asked me, she identifies herself as a social worker. And she said, do you have any other children? I said, I do. Like, where is he? Like, he's with my mom. And she's like, is it okay if we go by and see him? So at that point, I'm like, I have nothing to hide, right? You want to go see him? Yeah, go ahead. I called my mom. At this point, it's around 9 o'clock at night. And she gets my mom's information and she leaves. So I figure, that's where she was going, was to my mom's house. Mm-hmm. The police officer stays with me, asks me if I would be willing to wait for the detectives, that the detectives were on their way. I'm like, okay, I'll wait. I'll speak to the detectives. And again, all in my mind, I'm thinking is they're going to go after the nanny. Right? I'm giving them all this information so that they can go get the nanny. My husband shows up at the hospital. The police officer takes him to a different room, interviews him separately, puts me in another room and closes the door to wait for the detectives. Mm-hmm. So in hindsight, we can kind of see what's going on now. But the detectives show up at around midnight. Okay, and remember, I'd been up since 4 o'clock in the morning. They show up at midnight. They interview me till about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I tell the detectives, I really need to get some sleep. I don't want to have a seizure now. So, we can continue later when I wake up if you would like. So they were very compliant. They gave me their business cards. And at this point, my husband already knew something had happened, but he didn't tell me. Mm-hmm. He knew that I had already been through enough stress that day. So he just gave me my medication. He's like, go to sleep. I went to sleep. I wake up at about 10 o'clock and my husband is just staring at me. And my first instinct, look at the bed, like the baby is alive. So what's going on? And he said, they took David. David is my 20-month-old son. Mm-hmm. I said, what do you mean they took David? Who? Where? And he's like, the social worker showed up at your mom's house. She's like, she lied to me. She told me he was going to see if they were okay. And he's like, that's not what happened. So I call my mom. And my mom says, yeah, they showed up at 2 o'clock in the morning with police officers, armed police officers, walk into my mom's house. They walk through the house, open the refrigerator doors, check if there's food. Then they go see where my son is. First thing the social worker does is turn on the lights. So wake up my son right there at 2 o'clock in the morning. And she asked my mom to undress him. No bruises, no rashes, no signs of abuse whatsoever. And, my mom is just holding him and she's like, they're telling me to take him. She's saying that the police is saying that we have to take him. And my mom is like, no, you're not. And the social worker is like, well, if you don't give him to us, we're going to arrest you. And my mom's like, okay, if I go to jail, do I take him with me? And the social worker says, no, he's going to go to foster care. And you're not going to be able to care for him because you're going to have a criminal record. So it's 2 o'clock in the morning. My dad is in the garage looking for lawyers. Nobody's answering the phone, of course. The police is there. The social worker is there calling for backup. My son is starting to notice, the commotion and that something is going on here. Yeah. And my mom like, what choice did I have? Like, what was I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. Right. So my mom goes and takes my son out to the social worker's car and straps him into the car seat. And off they go in the middle of the night. Didn't tell my mom where they were taking him, why they were taking him. Mm-hmm. Just gave the business card and said, call me tomorrow. So there we are. At 10 o'clock in the morning, my husband is calling the social workers. They won't answer. The mm-hmm. supervisor won't answer. Basically, our son is missing. We don't know where our son is and what's going on. So I start calling the lawyers. I finally got a lawyer who was willing to see me that day. And I go see him and I'm laughing. I'm like, okay, this is some kind of mistake, right? Like, this is some communication error. Like, where's my son and where do I go get him? Yeah. And he's like, sit down. I sit down. He's like, you have no idea what you're in for. I'm like, what do you mean I have no idea what I'm in for? I didn't do this. And he's like, I believe you. Doesn't matter. I go, what do you mean doesn't matter? What happened to innocent until proven guilty? What happened to the nanny? What the heck is this? They can't just come in and take your kid. And he's like, yeah, they can. They can. It's family court and they don't follow constitutional law. They can do whatever they deem is in the best interest of the child. And I'm hearing this and I'm like, what does that mean? How is it in the best interest of the child to wake up my son at 2 o'clock in the morning and take him to some place we don't even know where he is? Yeah. And my lawyer's like, oh, I know where he is. He had it on speed dial already. Mm-hmm. Calls the children's shelter, says, my name is so-and-so. I'm representing so-and-so. Is the kid there? You're like, yeah, okay, yeah, he's there. Then he's like, okay, we'll deal with this later. But first, let me tell you, what you're facing right now is criminal. Okay, you're facing 15 years in jail, $100,000 bail if they decide to charge you. And I'm like, I didn't do this. And he's like, I know, I believe you, but that's what you're facing. And your children are under 2 years old and nonverbal. They can be legally adopted by the foster family if the case lasts longer than 6 months. I'm like, adopted? Without ever proving that I did this? Like, yeah. So I'm not even going to fight for you. I'm not going to go in there and ask the judge to give the kids back to you, because if I do that, they're going to go, the judge is going to say no. Social services is going to say, that you're placing the children in danger mm-hmm. because the mom has a criminal investigation against her, and they're going to go to foster care. And if it lasts longer than 6 months, they're going to be adopted, and they will make it last longer than 6 months. I'm just floored, right? I'm listening to all this. I'm like, what country am I living in? Like, what is going on? And I'm like, so what are you telling me? What are we going to do? He's like, your saving grace is that your husband was out of town when this happened. So legally speaking, he wasn't even at the crime scene. So we're going to ask the judge to give sole custody to your husband. That way we don't even risk the children being placed in foster care. And if the judge grants that, they're going to kick you out of the house. So I'm like, at this point, what choice do I have? Risk going in there and fighting for my rights, which really don't exist in family court, or have my children go to strangers and risk them being adopted and never seeing my children again. So I said, okay, we went 3 days later, we had what they call the emergency hearing. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking it's going to be at least, like Judge Judy style. The judge is there, one side here, you speak, and the judge says something. Uh-huh. So I go in there, the nanny's not there, the police officer isn't there, the social worker isn't there. None of the parties that were involved in all of this are there, except for me and my husband. And the lawyers start talking to each other, speaking legalese with each other. And I'm thinking, okay, when's it going to be my turn? When is the judge going to ask me what happened? Never.
Nope.
Never happened. The judge simply stated to me, Miss Bruno, you have 24 hours to vacate your home. A caseworker will be contacting you regarding visitation. We will see you again for, I forget what the name is called, but for some other hearing in 3 weeks. And then slam that gavel. And that was it. It was probably 10 to 15 minutes at the most. Huh. And I walk out with my mom. Of course, I'm crying. I'm like, I'm still in shock, not believing that this is actually happening. And I go back to my house, pack up all my stuff, Had a very good neighbor at the time who let me put all my boxes, all my stuff into his house. And my attorney at that time, he's like, you remove everything. Like, you can't even leave a toothbrush in your house. They will use everything against you. Okay, I don't want to see nothing of yours. Take your shampoo bottles, take everything, so that they can't say that you're still coming into the house to do something.
Right.
So I removed everything, and I was given 7 hours a week of visitation with both my sons. I was court ordered to take child abuse classes, parenting classes, and individual counseling. So this went on, and I had nowhere to go. Like, where am I supposed to live? They wouldn't let me live with my mom because my mom was with my son when he was seized. I'm an only child. My whole family's in Brazil. My husband was with the children. I'm like, where the heck am I supposed to go? And my lawyer's like, well, as long as your son is in the hospital, you could sleep in the hospital. It's a monitored facility, so you could stay there. Like, okay. So I stayed a few nights in the hospital. And my mom actually went to our church and asked the pastor to come and pray for me. At this time, he wasn't there. He was in Cambridge, but his wife was here. And she went to the hospital. You know, she saw the state of my son. She prayed for my son. She prayed for me and then looked at me and she said, you know, I've been praying and God told me you're coming home with me. So at that point, I went to go live with the pastor's wife, you know, and God just put all these people, these amazing people in my life during this most horrendous time, you know, something I never, ever could have imagined. And it lasted 40 days and 40 nights. I was kicked out of the house for 40 days and 40 nights.
Are you kidding me? Wow.
And on that 40th day, we had a hearing, and my attorney told me, don't even bother coming. Because, you know, the status of your investigation hasn't changed. The criminal investigation is still open, so don't waste your time. I won't waste mine. I tell my husband's like, I don't care what he's saying, we're going. So we go to the courthouse. About an hour later, he calls me, like, where are you? I'm at the courthouse. Like, okay, I'm on my way. Might be able to do something today. He hangs up on me. I'm like, okay. Again, everybody start praying. So we're waiting for him to show up. He shows up. I go hug him. He pushes me away. He's like, don't hug me. I can't make you any promises. I'm like, okay. So he walks into that courtroom, comes out, sign this, initial this, scribble. I'm just like back and forth for about 3 hours. I have no idea what I'm signing. I'm just trusting God and my lawyer at that point.
Right.
Then he comes out with a big stack of papers. He's like, if you're willing to sign this the way it's written today, there's nothing in here admitting guilt. There's nothing in here saying that you did this. It's the timeline of events. It's the social worker's narrative. It's the medical records, all that stuff. They will let you go home today. Now, at that point, if they told me to cut my leg off, I would have done it. Right? I just wanted to be home with my sons. So I signed it. And he even said it. He's like, I've been doing this for 23 years. And I have never seen them let anybody go home before a trial. It's like, you definitely have a higher power working for you. And I said, amen. Yes, I do. So I went home that day, you know, and I was still court ordered to take all the services, what they call services, the child abuse, the parenting, the individual counseling. And a social worker was coming to our house once a month for the next 6 months. And at the end of the 6 months, it was her recommendation that our case be closed. So in 6 months, we went to another hearing. Again, never stepped foot in that courtroom, never said a word in that courtroom. Just somebody comes out and says, Bruno family? Yeah, case is closed. I'm like, okay, that's it. Like, yep, that's it. So it was closed, you know, and during those 6 months, doing those parenting classes, the child abuse classes, I'm thinking to myself, no, what the heck am I going to do in a child abuse class? I'm thinking I'm going to be in there with a bunch of tattooed people with, you know, drug abuse problems, alcohol, domestic violence, you name it. And when I get there, everybody's in the same boat that I am. Nobody had intentionally abused their child. There were bathtub accidents, slip in the bathtub, baby breaks the arm, child abuse. Parking, swinging at the park, child dislocates the leg, child abuse. There was even an older case, the teenage girl, about 15 years old, posting naked pictures of herself on Instagram. And the father took away the phone, the father took away the car, the father grounded her, did everything he absolutely could to prevent his daughter from doing this. And one day at his graveyard shift, he's scrolling through his phone and he sees naked pictures of his daughter on her friend's account. So he comes home that night and he spanks her. He's like, you don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
So she calls her biological father, who was a criminal, and he tells her, you want to get rid of him? Call the police and tell them that he hit you. And that's what she did. And then the stepfather gets arrested. The other 4 children are taken away and placed in foster care. He spent 10 days in jail. And then here we are in the child abuse class together, jumping through all these loopholes to try to prove our innocence, basically.
Yeah.
And I mean, 1 time is a mistake, 2 times coincidence, 3 times, now you have a pattern. And I'm seeing all these stories. I'm like, this is weird. But then again, why? Like, why would somebody do this? Like, why? So, of course, Dr. Google, start Googling things, start reading things and going down that rabbit hole. And there's actually a federal law that was implemented by Bill Clinton called the Adoptions and Safe Families Act,
mm-hmm.
which was passed in 1997. And gives the states federal incentives to speed up the adoption process so that children could find their forever homes. Right. I heard that term a lot when I was growing up. These children need a forever home. These mm-hmm. children need stability. These poor children.
Yeah.
And, I always thought foster care was, the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And that if your children got taken away, you must have done something really bad.
You would be a horrible person. Yes.
Yes. And then here I am. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And, these forever homes and then the money, the state gets anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 per child per month that is placed in foster care. And my mom, when they seized my son, they let my mom pick him up from the shelter because at the time she's a retired school teacher, public mm-hmm. school teacher. So she was already in the system. She was already fingerprinted. Right. So they released him to her. And they asked her before I even had the hearing. They asked my mom if she would be willing to adopt my 2 sons. My mom's like, no. And the social worker said, well, we don't know what the judge is going to order at the hearing. So if the judge orders the removal of the children, will you adopt them? My mom's like, give them back to their mom to whom they belong. And the social worker, well, we don't know. We don't know. This is how we help the families. You would get $670 a month per child. They would be eligible for food stamps, for WIC, for Medicaid, all the social welfare programs we have here in California.
Right.
And my mom's like, I don't want your money. And the social worker, well, this is how we help you. This is what you qualify for. And my mom's like, what happens if I don't sign this or if I don't adopt them? Then she's like, well, they're going to go to foster care. So my mom hesitantly signed the documents. Mm-hmm. And she did, here you go. And she's like, can I save the checks for the lawyers? And the social worker said, I'll pretend I didn't hear that. So, but she did. And, then at the hearing, they were given to their father. So thankfully, my mom never had to adopt my kids. Mm-hmm. But, just goes to show you there was no investigation. There was no due process. They spoke to the nanny once after they had already seized my children. And she said the baby was perfectly fine when she left. And they believed her, and that was it.
So did anything, was there ever any follow-up with the nanny whatsoever?
Just that one time. Really? That one time, the day after, they went to go talk to her, and she told her side of the story. And she did take a polygraph that night. It came back inconclusive. They asked her to take it again, and she refused to take it again, which is her right.
Right.
But, they didn't afford me the same privilege. And I did get a private investigator, to see if we could find anything on the nanny. Mm-hmm. And no red flags, except that she was married to a cop at the time. She didn't tell me, which I wouldn't have thought anything of anyway.
No, that would not have been a red flag then, but...
Yeah, but my investigator, he told me, he's like, they're not going to go
She's
after
untouchable.
Her. Yeah. So it was very disappointing, to see this, but it did open my eyes to a lot of things and to be a voice for these parents. I never would have believed it had it not happened to me. Right. And I think a lot of people feel that way and think, you must have done something. If you got your kid taken away, you must have done mm-hmm. something. And people don't realize that there is no due process. Your criminals have more rights than parents in family court.
Yeah.
If you go to a legitimate federal court, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you have the jury, you have present your evidence, both sides get questioned, all that good stuff that we see on TV, are what we usually think of when we think of court.
Yeah.
Family court has none of that. You basically are guilty until proven innocent. You have to prove your innocence. So, even after I went home, I was happy, of course. The case was closed. I could have gone on with my life, but I just could not forget what I knew, right? What I saw, and all these parents fighting for their children, what the children were going for, just my children, just within that little short span of 40 days. My son was not the same boy that I knew, right? I mean, he rejected me for probably about a year after this whole process.
Wow.
And he kept saying, "I don't want you, mommy." He would scream and cry every time we had to leave my mom's house. She's the one who picked him up from the shelter. So,
Right.
she was the one who rescued him, and I abandoned him. And I mean, I was building a wall against my 2-year-old son because, the words hurt. And I'm praying about him. My God, I can't build a wall against my son. I know he's the victim here. I'm a victim too. But, you're the adult in this situation. Right. So put your big girl pants on. And I sat down with my son and I asked him, I'm like, do you remember when your aunties had to come take care of you? And these were my cousins who came from Brazil to help my husband out so that he could work and they would take care of the kids.
Right.
And first words out of his mouth are, "Why did you leave?" So at this point, I knew that he remembered. So I sat down with him. I showed him all the pictures of his brother in the hospital. I'm like, "Look, this is what happened to your brother." And they thought that mommy did this. And he immediately, fringed his eyes like, "You never hurt us, mommy." I'm like, I know. But they thought they were doing their job. Again, I'm trying to see how do I communicate this to a 3-year-old at that point without creating, rebellion against authority, hate doctors, hate police officers, hate everybody. So explaining to him, every profession, there's going to be some bad apples. They just made some really bad choices, but we're not going to let them get away with it. Okay, we're going to fight them. And he looks at me. He's like, "You going to hit them, mommy?" I'm like, "Yeah, we're going to hit them with a stack of papers." That's what we're going to do.
Yes.
So I contacted a civil rights attorney. His name is Sean McMillan here in California. And this is basically all he does is sue CPS. So about 4 months of calling him, I finally got a hold of him. He looked over our case. He's like, "Yeah, you definitely have a case." It was a warrantless seizure. They did not have a warrant to take my son when they showed up at my mom's house at 2:00 in the morning. And through the discovery process, when we're getting access to all the documents, we found out they gave my son 13 vaccinations without consent and without a court order. They forced my son through a full skeletal survey without consent. They gave him an anal wink test, which is for sexual abuse when there were no allegations of sexual abuse. So we're just seeing all this stuff going on. Like they were just looking for anything that they could pin on myself or my husband. They kept asking if I had postpartum depression, kept asking if it was possible that I had a seizure and I did this, just different things like that coming up. But we filed the lawsuit. So it was a violation of 4th Amendment and 14th Amendment rights. Got to depose the detectives, the social worker, the supervisor. We also got text messages, access to all their text messages that night. And interestingly enough, the social worker that interviewed me at the hospital, we got a text message exchange between her and her supervisor before she even arrived at the hospital.
Okay.
So she's texting her supervisor saying, "I'm on my way to the hospital. There's an infant with a cranial fracture, has a sibling. Per mom, the baby was with the nanny." And the supervisor texts her back. She says, "OMG, do you think it was the nanny?" And then the social worker texts back, "No, think mom." Before they ever got to the hospital.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
Well, seriously, why would it be you rather than the nanny?
Right. And I mean, the cynical me that knows the system now thinks that if they didn't accuse me, then there wouldn't be any custody issue or social services wouldn't be involved, period. It would have been strictly a criminal investigation and they would have had to go after the nanny. So they wouldn't have gotten the funding. They wouldn't have gotten anything. out of the 2 children.
Yeah, and it's that kind of thing that, I mean, I'll tell you, Rachel, I'm sorry, everybody. I know there's some echoing going on. I'm not sure why it wasn't going on before we went live. So I'm not sure what the story is there. But I am not naturally I'm not naturally a conspiratorially minded person at all. And then, every now and then you hear something that makes you go,
Yeah.
And then Epstein didn't kill himself.
Right.
And it's now it's kind of like off to the races,
Yeah.
And like I said, your story reminded me of medical kidnapping instances. Michelle Mulliken had done an expose on that 2 or 3 years ago, and it's interestingly the thing behind that was another law passed by Bill Clinton. Oddly enough, when you mentioned that in another interview, that's what made me think of it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's something like, basically you can use people as medical guinea pigs is what it boiled down to.
Wow.
Yeah, and it starts to make a guy wonder. It's like, yeah, it's in your case, obviously.
Yeah.
Whether it was fully conscious or not, somewhere in the back of their minds,
right,
they're thinking money for the system.
Right. And in the depositions, they admit that there was no exigent circumstances, which is one of the only exceptions to removing a child without a warrant. Is if there's exigent circumstances, right? Mm-hmm. It's a life or death situation. The kid is going to die right there that night if you don't remove them.
Yeah.
And she admits that my son had no signs of abuse. She admits that she should have gotten a warrant and that she knew how to get a warrant. And we're just, I'm sitting there listening to them and I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Like, you knew all this and you still did it? I'm thinking of all the other families that are going through this who don't have the financial means to fight back, who did not have the financial means to get a private attorney like I did, even in dependency court. If you go with the public defender, unfortunately, the public defender works for the system as well. Right. And they're like coworkers, right? They don't want to upset the judge. They don't want to upset the other counsels. They work together.
Right. Yeah. Their bosses know the other people's bosses, and it's just phone call away.
One of the things that I tell people, I'm like, please sell your car, mortgage your house, beg your family, whatever you need to do to get a private attorney. If you ever find yourself in the situation, please do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because even in that child abuse class, there was an 18-year-old kid who had a child, had a baby, and he slipped in the bathtub while he was picking the baby up. Dropped the baby hit their arm on the side of the bathtub, and baby was screaming and crying, and he went to the emergency room. He told them, this is what happened. I dropped the baby. But because it was fractured in more than one place, there were 2 fractures, they said it was child abuse. So they removed the baby from him. He's 18 years old, no money, no real family support at that point, gets a public defender. Public defender tells him basically the same thing my lawyer told me, you're facing 15 years in jail, $100,000 bail. So why don't we just go into the judge, tell the judge you're sorry, that it's not going to happen again, and we'll do 2 years instead of 15. And that's what he did. No. So 18-year-old goes to jail. Now he's 20. He's in the child abuse class with us, trying to get his child back. He can't find a job because he now has a criminal record. And of course, social services is using that against him. How are you going to support a child?
Yeah.
And it destroys people's lives. It really destroys people's lives, the parents' lives and the child's life. This poor kid is being used as a pawn basically for funding for the state. And like I said, my son was rejecting me for a year. He doesn't understand. I can't imagine a kid who gets taken away from their family and never gets to see their parent again, or only sees them at the visitation center, or gets moved around from house to house to house until they find somebody who's willing to adopt them.
Yeah.
And then people question why these kids end up, in human trafficking. I think even Secretary Pompeo said that 67% of human trafficking victims come out of foster care. And I'm like, well, yeah, you guys, rip their lives, rip them apart. Who are they going to trust?
Yeah.
Right? You can't trust your parents. They've been lied to their whole life about what their parents did, most likely.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that there aren't some parents that do need to have their child removed.
Well, yeah, like we were talking about before the show. I mean,
right. Yeah. I mean, there
you hear
definitely
those
is.
other stories where you've got meth heads who
Yep.
are or obvious abusers,
Right.
and for some reason they never get their kids taken away. And you're
Right.
like, what on earth?
Yeah.
What backwards crapped out world do we live in where
Yep.
what
Yeah.
happened to you happens to you and other people like you, and
Yeah.
then actual horrible people who are the stereotypes you were expecting to meet in the child abuse
Right.
class, they get to keep their kids until their kids die.
Yeah. And, like I told you, I mean, the only thing I can come up with is that, unfortunately, the children who are really abused by their parents most likely have behavior issues.
Mm-hmm.
They're usually older, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, when they usually can't speak up to a teacher or any other professional that they're mandated to report the abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But usually, people want to adopt babies, right? Babies that they can raise themselves.
Yep.
People usually don't want a problem child that will disrupt their own families most of the time, definitely will.
Yeah.
So, they're not placeable. That's the language they use, that they're not placeable.
Mm-hmm.
And I even have a friend that I met in the child abuse class. Her children were taken away. They were separated into different families. The oldest one was a problem child. I mean, he drove the families crazy. And he eventually ended up in a group home because nobody wanted to adopt him. They had him on all sorts of meds, psychotropic meds.
Right.
The social worker diagnoses him with ADD and with, whatever kind of diseases the social worker says he has. Yeah, the social worker. Then the doctors that work for the county will prescribe all the medication. So, I mean, it's crazy. It's so crazy. But just to end, my side, once we did start the lawsuit and all this stuff did start coming out, and, they admitted that they did what they did. I have it all on video. I have 36 hours worth of depositions with them admitting it. And we finally decided to settle in December of 2018. We settled for $1.49 million.
Mm-hmm.
And, people always say, it's about the money. And I mean, there's no amount of money that could ever repay me what they did.
No, considering the circumstances, 1.49 is chump change.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's the only way we can hold them accountable is their pocketbook.
Yep.
Had I had real justice, I wish they would have all been in jail. That's what I wanted.
Real justice in this situation involves a baseball bat. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, even to settle, I did not want to settle. I'm like, we had the trial scheduled for June 9th, 2019. And I told my lawyer, I'm like, I don't care if I win $1 in this trial. I just want these people to be held accountable. And my lawyer's like, I understand. I'm not saying your case doesn't have merit, definitely merit, and I don't think you're going to lose. But juries are a toss-up. People are finicky.
They're fickle, yeah.
Right? You never know. Like, you can remind them of a teacher they hated in 3rd grade. Who knows? That just from that point on, not like you.
Yeah.
Right? So, and we don't know how much they're going to award you. It could be 100,000. It could be 10 million. We don't know.
Yeah.
And even if you do win, the other side is going to appeal. They're going to appeal their decision. Then we're back to square one.
It just keeps going.
And then you're going to keep going for another 5 years. So he's like, as your counsel, I tell you, take this money and run so that you can flip this chapter, start a new phase in your life, and, go on. So I did it. I listened to him. We took the money. But I mean, I slept for like 3 days after that. I felt like a sellout. I felt like, this is not justice. This is not what I wanted. But just, had to feel the pain, had to grieve that's just the way it is. That's what's going to be. And take this money, paid off all our bills because we did owe a lot of money throughout all this process.
I'm sure you did, yeah.
My husband and I, when this started, owned our own business. And we had to end up closing our business because my husband had to take care of the 2 kids by himself at home and had to find another job. And we were paying lawyers. We were paying, child abuse, parenting, individual counseling, the medical bills, everything, you name it. So this money gave us the ability to pay everything off, give us a clean slate financially to start again. And, as crazy as it sounds, we are very blessed. We are one of the lucky ones
Yeah.
that did win the lawsuit, that did get our children back, because I know far too many who don't.
Mm-hmm.
And they are no worse than me. I'm no better than any of them. I'm a parent. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. And people just need to, have empathy for people. Don't judge people. If the kids are being noisy in the backyard, don't call CPS. Okay. Like, go knock on the door and, ask, can you please be
Oh, good
quiet? Or,
heavens.
help the mom out if the mom is a single mother and she's going crazy with all these kids.
If if for crying out loud, if the neighbors called somebody every time my kids are loud,
Yeah.
I probably won't have kids anymore. I mean, for one, I have like 6 kids, so it's loud a lot over here.
Yeah.
It just is.
Yeah. And then again, like the money, they offered my mom $670 to adopt my son.
Yeah.
Why not offer that $670 to a parent who is really in need of help?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like a lot of the cases, gosh, like 68% of the cases are neglect.
Mm.
Neglect can look a lot like poverty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
actually.
you have holes in your shoes, you're not well bathed, or you're not well fed, or whatever. So, why not take that money and actually help a parent as opposed to ripping a family apart and giving the money to strangers to raise the kid?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
it doesn't
exactly.
make sense.
No. No, it does not. And you know what? That kind of thing, like that's like, oh my gosh, you left the house in that?
Yeah.
Trust me,
Right.
I've got a good paying day job,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you got 6 kids. You know what? Sometimes they put on stuff, and you're just like, why? I
Yeah.
don't I don't have any clothes that fit. How do you not have clothes that fit?
Yeah. Right. No, exactly. Sometimes you see in the grocery store the kid is in a pajama with mismatched socks or whatever. I'm like, if you've had a toddler and the toddler will not put the blue shirt on, they don't
Nope.
want the blue shirt, they want to go with their pajamas, right?
Oh,
So you're like,
we
fine,
gave
go with
up
your pajamas.
matching socks 15
Yes.
years ago. That's not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
We don't care. You
Oh,
pick your battles. But
yeah,
so
exactly.
in your whole story, there is so many different things to unpack, so many different
Yeah.
ways to go with it here, and oh my, I honestly I don't even know where to start. I think one thing to definitely take from it is to do what you did.
Mhm.
Call on whoever you can to help,
Right.
and for crying out loud, fight.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned the poor kid who took his lawyer's advice
Right.
and did the plea deal.
Yeah.
Not a not a. I understand why it seems appealing at the time.
Yeah.
Not a good plan.
Right. Not a good plan, but at the same time, family court is very
Intimidating.
difficult to fight in family court
Mm-hmm.
because they are vengeful. They will retaliate against you if you try to say you're not going to do something that they want you to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my attorney at the time, he told me, you do whatever the heck they tell you to do. And you shut up. You don't talk about anything about the case.
Mm-hmm.
He pled the
Yeah.
fifth for me so that you
Mm-hmm.
don't talk about the case.
Yep.
And they act so friendly when they come to your house, when they come talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tell my lawyer, yeah, she asked me about this. She asked me how my seizures are doing. She asked me about the postpartum. And my lawyer, he's like, you do not talk to these people. Okay, you do not answer these questions. They cannot talk about the case. Like, nobody here is your friend.
Yep.
Like, the only friend you have here is me, and that's only because you paid me. That's what he told me.
You got to appreciate an honest lawyer. He's
You know,
mercenary, but at least he's
okay.
honest about it.
Yeah, but I mean, the social worker who would go to my husband when my husband was alone with the kids and I was
Uh-huh.
kicked out of the house, they would go 3 times a week to my house to go talk to my husband. And my husband would ask, can my wife, we're paying a lot for these classes, for the individual counseling, for the parenting classes, for the child abuse classes. Is there any way we can, maybe not take these anymore since, she is allowed to go home and things like that? And the social worker would tell my husband, oh yeah, tell your wife to file this petition or to ask the judge for this motion or whatever, and he'll do it. So my husband and I, when we could meet, once the children were sleeping and then we could meet at night, he would tell me, he's like, no, the social worker told you that you could do this and, not have to take these classes anymore. And I'm like, okay. So I'd go tell my lawyer, and then my lawyer, do not listen to these people. Like, you do not file this thing. No, 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 no. You keep going to all these classes. if you file this petition, the judge is going to say that you're not taking the thing seriously, that you're putting your kids at risk. You do not listen to these people. And then I'd go tell my husband, and my husband's like, but she said this is true. I'm like, but it's not true. So it would put me and my husband against each other. Mm-hmm. And they do that all the time. I don't know how many marriages were ruined through this process.
Well, that gets right into, like, I would say the second most important angle to take on this, and that's, like, well, your lawyer said, they're not your friends.
Right.
They're not here to help you.
Right.
If somebody comes to the store and says, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, I close that door. Right. They are not here to help you. It doesn't matter how friendly they seem.
Yep.
And just from your whole story, and you hear things like this from time to time. They rely on fear. They rely on ignorance. They rely on uncertainty in the situation, because all of a sudden you've got a social worker, a stern-faced social worker with 2 or 3 armed cops standing behind him or her, and they're saying, you need to give me your kid.
Yeah.
Out of the blue, left field, most people are not going to have the wherewithal to say,
right,
where's your warrant?
Exactly. Yep.
Most people aren't going to. Or they're going to say, ma'am, it's a child endangerment issue. I don't need a warrant.
Right.
They might be flat out lying to you.
Right.
But unless you've studied law, specifically that section of the law,
right,
you're not going to know that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's what I tell people again. No warrant, no entry. Right. Yep. And they will use all the psychological tricks, like you're saying, to get you to do it. And you do not have to let them in your house. Okay. Oh, yeah. Do not let them in your house.
Yeah. I got to think psychological trick. Yeah.
Right. That I'm not letting you in my house. You can come with a warrant when you have a warrant, and, close the door, and that's it.
Yeah. And stick
not to
with
say that they're not going to go get a warrant. They probably will.
Right.
Okay. But at least it gives you at least 24 hours to figure out what the heck you're going to do. In those 24 hours, you get a lawyer. You get your kids with somebody who you trust and who's safe with, and get them out of the house. Just make their job a little bit harder or a lot harder than what they're usually used to.
Yeah. If for crying out loud, at least make them work for it.
Right.
And we've all seen the movies. I'm sure as soon as you say you're going to need a warrant, they'll say, well, I can call and get one within an hour.
Right.
Well, fine, we'll do that, and I'll see you in an hour.
Right. Yep.
Stick with it.
Yeah.
And at least let them know it's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
It's like treat them like any bully.
Yeah.
Stand up to them, and a lot of times a bully backs down.
Yeah.
Not always.
Yeah.
They'll probably it'll be a little bit of a shoving match for a bit.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. It's really scary.
Yeah. Oh, I can't imagine. Like I said, I've got a number of kids. I can't imagine this happening to any of them.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's utterly terrifying to imagine that, especially, and I won't go too far down this rabbit trail, but given the environment we're in, if you don't think that CPS is going to wind up getting used against certain people in certain places, you are not paying anything close to attention.
Yeah.
I mean, what we were talking before we went live, there's already been kids that have been taken away because their parents tested positive for COVID.
Yeah.
Over in California, I think I've seen that 1 or 2 other places as well, where it's like, really? Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like my lawyer said, they don't follow constitutional law. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? What other law is there? Right, in the country. The Constitution is supposed to be the law of the land.
One would think so. But alas,
But
no.
Each state, in order to qualify for the Clinton's law to get the federal funding, they had to come up with a separate set of rules so that they could qualify for the funding. So here in California, it's called the Welfare Institutions Code, WIC. And it's WIC 300 is where they have all the child welfare stuff that they must follow. But if they don't have a separate code, then they can't get the federal funding. So it's very, very weird.
It's nasty, it's convoluted, it's intentionally obscure.
Yeah.
And virtually impenetrable to normal people. Fortunately, again, you had an intelligent lawyer who's been through this process before, who knew how to play the game. Like that bit with your husband. He was out of town. So therefore, there's this little loophole that
Mm-hmm.
We'll let him have custody. It's like, awesome, great.
Right.
You know, not perfectly ideal, but a heck of a lot better than any number of alternatives.
Yeah.
And again, praise God the judge went for it.
Yeah. No, and when we were at the hearing, the
Mm-hmm.
social workers objected, or social workers council, the
I'm
county
sure they
council objected.
Mm-hmm.
And the attorney or the judge is like, why? And the council's like, well, the social worker never got to speak to the father, so we don't know whether he's a fit father or not. And at the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
the police officer that was talking to my husband explicitly told social services to not speak to my husband because it was a criminal investigation. So they weren't allowed to speak to him.
Huh.
So it was interesting, when by the grace of God, the judge overruled,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, no, the children will go to their father.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I've never been through something like that. I mean, that was crazy. It was surreal living that and not knowing, I'm thinking of facing jail. And I'm like, but I didn't do this. And at the same time, God really did give me peace through all of it as I was going through it.
Mm-hmm.
Drew me closer to God. I
Right.
remember at nighttime, of course, you can't sleep, thinking about what's going on. Where's your son? My other son, who spent 12 days in the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
Finally did go home, and he did, of course, survive the 48 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But what is my son what's gonna happen, right, with my baby?
Yeah.
And praying at night, reading those little books in the Bible that don't get much attention because they're small, James, Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, these little books
Right.
that I could read at night.
Yeah.
And I remember reading them, draw close to me, draw close to God, he'll draw close to you.
Mm-hmm.
And remember reading Job, and thinking, oh my gosh.
Relevant. Very relevant.
Very relevant. And even somebody, when I was going through that, somebody very close to me told me that I should repent, right? That what was going on,
Wow. Did they just
Yeah.
read Job 2 and take completely the wrong message from it?
But I'm just like, okay, I prayed. I'm like, okay, God, who sinned? Was it my husband? Was it my parents? Like, what? Why am I
Right.
going through this? And, the only reason I mention it is because that was a turning point, at that night when I prayed about it. And Holy Spirit revealed to me, he's like, nothing. No one has sinned, nothing. This is just the evil world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is about the destruction of the family.
Yeah.
Right? This whole system, everything you're witnessing right now is about the destruction of the family,
Mm-hmm.
which is what the devil has been trying to do from day one.
Which, honestly, that was one of the things I was thinking
Mhm.
when I was, again, listening to another interview that you had done, is like,
Mhm.
this whole thing, it's like the goal is specifically to target normal people
Right.
with normal families, and yet at the same time protect the ones who
Mhm.
really do have issues, who really do, frankly, not deserve their kids.
Right.
And it's like, it's completely backwards. It's designed, again, like you had clearly pointed out to you,
Yeah.
it is about the destruction of the family, and here we are, and it's
Yeah.
terrifying. And I'm glad, I'm glad it wasn't like this, 30, 35 years ago when I was growing up,
Yeah.
because my parents always joked that they were on like a first name basis with the ER doctors.
Yeah.
Because not for me, my little brother, he was an energetic young lad,
Right.
and he was that kid that would be like, I could probably jump off that and be fine.
Yeah, I mean, kids are kids, right?
Sometimes he would be.
It's not happen anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes he would be fine. Every now and then, not so
Yeah.
much. Something breaks and off to the ER again. It's like, yeah, well, what are you gonna do? These days, because my parents were normal people with jobs and
Yeah.
2 kids and a house and all of that jazz.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who knows?
It's crazy. I mean, so many different things and so many other cases. I don't know, James Young, I think they were in Texas, where, this gets into some other stuff, but the mother wanted the child to transition.
Oh, that story. Yeah.
And that, they were pinpointing the father for not wanting to do that and claiming that the father is the one who was abusive and wanting to give custody to the mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this world is crazy.
that poor guy. And in Texas, no less.
Yeah. Yep. So the world is just completely upside down. What's left is right, what's up is down, what's black is white. I mean, you name it. I mean, it's really crazy world right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, us normal people, as you say, need to educate ourselves about what is out there, and that there are ulterior motives in a lot of these government programs that we're not aware of. Mm-hmm. And again, before you call CPS on your neighbor, on your ex, on anybody, please reach out first. To them.
Amen. Yes.
Reach out to a church, reach out to a nonprofit organization. If they need rehab, if they need whatever, reach out to anyone except CPS, unless, like they say, it's an existential circumstance where the kid is going to die. And even then, it's still risky, that this child is going to be placed in another abusive situation, which also tends to happen in foster care.
Yeah. Rather famous for that, really.
Yeah. And, chances are they're never going to see their parent again, which is really heartbreaking. I think that's one of the saddest parts of this, that I know somebody who was in that child abuse class with me, and she had the same attorney I did, the same judge I did, the same hospital I did, the same caseworker I did, and her parental rights were terminated in October of 2017 because her son at the time was 18 months old at the time. He broke tibia and fibia. Ooh. And they removed him. She got pregnant. No, not wise, of course, but she got pregnant while the case was open. And they took the baby from the delivery room and gave him to another family.
I would have lost my mind.
I know. And I mean, I'm in the child abuse class with her and I'm listening to this and I'm like, this is insanity. This is crazy. And I mean, to this day, I'm still friends with her. She is one of my good friends. We did become friends through this. And I told her, nothing happens without a reason or without a purpose. God made us cross paths for something. And I remember her crying and me telling her, not many people are going to be able to look you in the eye and tell you, I know what you're going through. And that I believe you. So, I mean, she lost the 4 kids that she had. Her husband lost the 2 kids that he had. They told them to get divorced, that the husband was not going to get his children back unless he divorced her. And he refused. He said, we're not getting a divorce. And the kids that's it. I mean, you lost 6 kids. And the adopted mom who has them, even if they adopt the child, they still get paid by the state. Even if you're legally the child's parent, you still get money from the state to raise that child until they're 18 or 22. I forget which age it is now because they changed the law so many times. Right. But they keep getting money. And the adoptive mom, the husband quit his job because they were receiving around $3,000 a month to take care of the 4 children. Yeah. And meanwhile, this poor woman who didn't do anything ran out of money, right? Couldn't afford to be paying the attorney anymore. And once they go to TPR, that's termination of parental rights. That's it. I mean, you have to appeal it and, God help you. Literally, God help you if you go through that appeals process while in family court. So, the only hope is that once they're 18, they can, leave their adoptive family and go back home. Wow. A lot of them do decide to go back home. But in the meantime, I mean, this woman placed a restraining order against the biological mother so that she couldn't even see them at school, couldn't come near them. She blocks all the internet access, blocks Facebook, anything that she can have communication with her children, the woman would block. So I'm like, how is that in the best interest of a child?
There is no way that I would be able to deal with that.
Yeah.
I mean, there just isn't.
Yep. It's
terrible. Yeah.
It's terrible.
Put it this way. I mean, somebody comes for my kids.
Yeah.
It it would be bad. Let's just, yeah. Anyway,
nowadays people say they want to replace the police with social workers.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I'm like, are you crazy? Like, you really don't know what you're asking for.
Well, at least they won't show up with armed support theoretically.
Yeah.
Although realistically, it just means they're going to have armed. They're just going to have armed social workers.
Yeah.
That's what that's really going to mean.
Yeah. The social workers, diagnosing you on the spot.
Yeah.
Because that's what they do right now.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. No. Anyway, I think the most important angle on this, though, is frankly the spiritual angle.
Yeah.
Because 40 days and 40 nights. Yeah, that's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
There's no way that's a coincidence. I mean, for one, that's one hell of a Lent.
Yeah.
It's like, and just that you got that particular, message from the Holy Spirit that this is what's going on here.
Yep.
It's not, the fact that it's not your fault, that this is just, it's part of what's been going on for a very long time. You're just kind of caught up in it.
Yeah.
And that it did after 40 days, 40 nights, you're able to go home, reunite with the family. And, thank God it was only that long.
Right.
Because, who knows how much more damage it would have done, to your boys had it gone longer, how much longer it would have taken to reconnect.
Yeah.
And just the fact that you did have that help that was needed, that you did eventually, you settled the civil suit, but you were able to help, you were able to hold them accountable to some degree. And, thank God. And now, again, you have the courage to come out and share this story and, warn other people that it's like, you're not here to help. There are ways to fight them.
Just fight them.
Yeah, thank goodness.
And parents. I mean, the innocent parents. I mean, I know the stigma, right, and the shame, and that people will automatically think that you did something.
Right.
Right. And I mean, I'm blessed that I didn't. I had a church family who really supported me throughout this. My husband, of course, never turned his back on me. I mean, people knew me, and I was surrounded, thank God. I was surrounded by people who loved me, who prayed for me, and who were with me 100%. But I know so many who don't have that. And if you don't have that, I mean, God is your only hope when you're in that situation. Because they took my kids from me, they took my husband from me, they took my house from me. That's what happens to a lot of people out there. So, I just want them to know I pray for you every night. My family prays for you. I want to start a nonprofit. Eventually, I will start a nonprofit. I want it to be, one-stop shop where I can offer legal advice, where I can offer, the services that they offer us in order to get your children back, where I can even have housing, because so many get taken away because the parents don't have adequate housing. So have a housing facility, have a monitored facility so that they don't get to take the children away because they're not monitored. There's so many loopholes, so many things that they use against you.
Right.
And, these parents need help. They really need help. And I wish I could gather the community, the Christian community. I think we've been brainwashed. We've been lied to when it comes to foster care, when it comes to what's going on behind the scenes. They tell you you're the hero. You're helping this child out. And they lie. Can you imagine a case like mine?
Yeah.
What a potential social worker would tell a potential foster family, that this innocent baby, the 7-week-old baby, had a cranial fracture while in the care of his mother.
Yep.
Will you please help this baby and his brother?
Well, right there, even those words right there actually isn't a single lie in those words.
Right.
Which is exactly how the devil lies. The devil lies by telling the truth.
Yeah.
Just telling you exactly the right truth in exactly the right way to lead you to exactly the wrong conclusion.
Right.
And, and again, you point out it's really important to activate, fellow Christians on this, because too often we have an inherent trust of the government.
Yeah.
So long as the government isn't explicitly anti-Christian, we tend to trust it.
Right.
And again, I don't want to go too far down a rabbit trail here, but it should be clear. It should be becoming increasingly clear to many of us that one, they are explicitly anti-Christian, and two, government can, if you want to argue, okay, government has authority and authority only comes from God, therefore government is ordained by God. Sure, if you don't think government can lose God's endorsement,
Yeah.
you are very, 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 very wrong.
Yeah.
It most certainly can.
Yes.
And a case like yours is a clear indication that all is not right. Government is a tool. It can be used in numerous ways by numerous people, by numerous forces, for good or for ill. And in a case like yours, it ain't God that's wielding that tool. No. All right?
Right.
So, actually, I almost forgot. You have a book that was supposed to be coming out soon, but 2020's kind of, thrown a monkey wrench or two or a hand grenade into the works.
Yeah.
But I assuming it's about your experience and everything.
Right. Yeah, it's still in the works. Like I said, I had to homeschool. Everything went out the window once I had both kids at home. But it will be working. And I always tell people, and I've done this interview, I've told this story a gazillion times. If you want to just listen to the story, you'll find me all over the internet. But in the book, you will hear my heart. Right? That's really what the book is about. It's about like I said, the spiritual component, the spiritual experience that I had while going through this. About marriage, about motherhood, about a lot of different things. Motherhood specifically, because, I have an MBA. I went to grad school. I started my business. I got married, waited a long time to have kids. I did everything right, according to the world.
Yeah.
And, I was a successful woman.
Right.
And, then I have kids and I'm like, okay, now here I am wiping butts and sucking snot all day. Like, really? This
sounds about right. Yeah.
So, I did have those conflicts.
Oh, yeah.
While I was growing up in motherhood. And then literally all hell broke loose. Right? And everything was taken away from me. And I'm like, I did not give a rat's butt about my MBA, about my business, about, being successful, about money, about any of that. All I wanted was my family.
Amen.
So, yes.
So, right, to close this out, what would your be advice? Somebody finds themselves in this situation. What are like the top things they should do right away?
Well, first thing we talked about, no warrant, no entry. So if they ever come knocking on your door, they will pressure you, but do not let them in your house. Do not let them talk to your children, as innocent as it may sound, right? Like I always thought, I have nothing to hide, so go ahead. And no, the Fifth Amendment exists for a reason.
Right.
Right? Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law, even though they don't tell you that. That is true. That is what's going to happen.
They mean it. Yeah.
Yeah, they mean it. So, don't let them in. When they do get a warrant, or if they do decide to come back, definitely get a private attorney, someone who's experienced in dependency law. It's different from family law.
Okay.
Right? Family law is like divorce and custody and those things. Dependency is specifically juvenile cases that deals with CPS.
Okay.
So definitely find an experienced attorney in that area. And pay them. Okay, I know, like I said, mortgage your house, sell your car, do whatever you have to do. They have your children's lives in their hands. Okay. And again, I know we're angry. I know our instinct is to fight. But this is not about you at this point, right? When you're in family court, this is about your children.
Yep.
So just think bigger picture. You do whatever the heck these people tell you to do. If they want you to do a random blood test or a random drug test, even though you do know drugs, do the freaking drug test, right? Don't argue about it. Pick your battles. Definitely don't fight with the social workers, because whatever they say is what the judge believes, right? So, and keep your mouth shut. Like they say, answer their question, yes, no, and nothing more. And what else? Do the services, like they say, do the services. And of course, pray. You will have to pray to have the strength to endure this. And think about your children. God loves your children more than you do. And they're his. And just pray that shield of protection over your children. And God will give you the strength to endure. And just keep going. Keep fighting, keep fighting, keep fighting. It's for your children.
There you go. And there's no better notes to possibly end on than that. So, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on and sharing the story and actually getting down into the nooks and crannies a little bit. And
Yeah, thank you. Anytime. And I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. If you ever, I have my own website, www.rachelbruno.com. You can email me there. I'll try my best to help you. And a lot of people who do contact me simply want an ear, somebody to listen to them
Mm-hmm.
and to let them know that they are human beings, that they do deserve respect, and that they are loved, and they need somebody with hope. So if you just need somebody to talk to, I'm here.
Awesome. And again, thank you. And if Rachel's story has taught us anything, there is definitely a fight out there. There is always a fight out there. And you know, we